They say the body remembers what the mind tries to forget. But mine didn't just remember, it screamed. Every time I moved, my spine reminded me of the night my brother pushed me. Every time I tried to sleep, my mother's voice whispered in the dark, "Don't ruin your brother's life, Alyssa. Keep quiet." It's strange how betrayal doesn't always arrive in the dark. Sometimes, it walks in through your front door, wearing a family name. I used to think pain had an end point, like a fever breaking or a storm clearing. But at 29, I learned that pain could become a place. A place you wake up in, move through, eat breakfast in. Before that night, my world was small but mine. I worked from home as a freelance illustrator, my days spent painting children's books and designing prints for small boutiques. It wasn't glamorous, but it was peaceful. My brother, Mark, was the opposite, loud, entitled, and perpetually angry. He was 32 and still living in the house our parents bought him after college, even though he'd never managed to keep a job longer than 6 months. Our mother, as always, defended him. "He's just trying to find himself," she'd say, as if the rest of us were born fully assembled. I hadn't spoken much to either of them for nearly a year. The last time we'd all been in the same room, Mark had called my art a hobby for people who couldn't make it in the real world. I'd left in tears. So when Mom called that evening, her voice tight and trembling, asking me to come over because we need to talk as a family, I almost said no. Almost. But she sounded different, frightened, even, and against my better judgment, I went. It was raining when I pulled up to their house. The lights were on, warm and familiar through the blur of the storm. I remember gripping the steering wheel for a moment, breathing, before stepping out into the cold. Mom opened the door before I could knock. She looked smaller somehow, her blonde hair grayer than I remembered, her eyes darting nervously behind me as if expecting someone else. "Mark's here," she said softly, "but he's calm now." Calm now. The last time she'd said those words, I ended up with a bruised wrist. Still, I stepped inside. The smell of dinner, roast chicken and lemon, hung in the air, mixing with that faint chemical scent of the disinfectant she always used. Mark sat at the dining table, beer can beside his hand, scrolling through his phone. He looked up when he saw me and smirked. "Well, look who remembered she has a family." I froze. "You wanted me here?" He shrugged. "Mom did. I couldn't care less." Mom's voice quivered. "Mark." He waved her off. "Relax, I'm being polite." I could feel the tension building already, the way it always did. Our family had mastered silence as weapon long before we mastered love. Mom gestured for me to sit. I did, across from Mark. "I just wanted us to talk," she said. "We've been apart too long. It's not healthy." Mark chuckled under his breath. "Yeah, because Little Miss Perfect's been busy painting cartoon cats." Something inside me snapped a little. At least I'm working. His head shot up. "Excuse me?" I met his eyes. "You heard me." He laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. "You think sitting in your apartment doodling for kids is a real job? It's better than living off Mom. That did it." His jaw tightened, eyes darkening. "You're so full of yourself, Alyssa." Mom stood up quickly. "Both of you, stop it. This isn't helping." But it was too late. I saw the shift in Mark's face, the way his grin curved into something cruel. He stood up slowly, beer still in hand. "You always think you're better than me," he said, his voice low. "You always have." "Mark, sit down," Mom hissed. I didn't back away. "I don't think I'm better. I just grew up." He slammed the beer can onto the table so hard it tipped, spilling across the tablecloth. Mom gasped, reaching for it, but he ignored her. He took a step closer to me. "Say that again," he said quietly. My heart pounded. I couldn't. Then he shoved me. It wasn't hard at first, a quick, angry motion, meant to intimidate. But my heel caught the rug behind me. My balance faltered. I reached for the chair beside me, but he shoved again, harder this time, shouting something I don't even remember. The next few seconds were noise and motion. My body twisted, my head hit the edge of the table, and then impact. A crack, a flash of white, and the world turned sideways. I couldn't breathe. My lower back burned like fire and ice all at once. When I tried to move, nothing happened. Mom's scream echoed through the room.
Mark, stop.
What did you do? He froze, his face pale. I didn't, she slipped. I tried to speak but couldn't. My breath came out in small gasps. The pain was everywhere. Mom knelt beside me, tears streaming down her face. Oh God, Alyssa, please don't move, just stay still. But then, as she looked toward Mark, something changed. Her face hardened. She turned back to me, her voice trembling but sharp. Well, tell them you fell. Do you understand? What? I whispered, my voice barely audible. Tears blurred my vision. I thought I'd misheard her, but she said it again, louder this time. Well, tell them you fell down the stairs. Do you hear me? Mom. I choked out. He pushed me. Mark's voice cracked. I didn't mean. Enough, she snapped at him, then back at me. Alyssa, if you say he attacked you, they'll take him away. It'll destroy his life. Our family. I couldn't process it. My back screamed with pain, and my mother, was bargaining with my agony. She grabbed my hand, squeezing hard. Promise me, she said. Promise you'll say it was an accident. Tears filled my eyes, spilling down my face. Mom, I can't feel my legs. She broke then, just for a second, her face crumpling. Please, baby, she whispered. For me. The sirens came minutes later, though it felt like hours. Paramedics lifted me onto a stretcher, their voices echoing in the fog. Possible spinal trauma, one said. Mark stood frozen by the stairs, hands trembling. Mom hovered behind them, her eyes red, her mouth set. She met my gaze as they carried me out. And that was when she said it. Don't ruin us, Alyssa. The hospital lights were blinding. Everything smelled of antiseptic and fear. They ran scans, hooked me to IVs, whispered words I barely understood. L2 fracture, incomplete spinal injury swelling. When I finally woke after surgery, my mother was sitting beside the bed. Her makeup was perfect again, as if nothing had happened. You're lucky, she said quietly. It could have been worse. I blinked at her. Worse. Her lips pressed tight. You're not paralyzed. You'll walk again with therapy. My voice was hoarse. Did you tell them what happened? She looked at me, eyes cold now. I told them you slipped. And that's what you'll say too. Mom. She leaned forward, gripping my hand. Don't you dare destroy this family. You'll heal. Then we'll move on. I turned my head away. My throat closed up. I couldn't tell if it was the pain or the betrayal that hurt more. The days blurred together after that. Nurses came and went, voices muffled by morphine. Every movement was agony. Every breath felt borrowed. But one morning, a new voice entered the room. Calm, grounded, and firm. Hi, Alyssa. I'm Evan. I'll be your physical therapist. I opened my eyes. He was young, maybe early 30s, with kind eyes and a quiet confidence that didn't demand anything from me. He glanced at the chart, then met my gaze. I know you've been through a lot. Well, start slow. My job is to help you get back what you can, step by step. I wanted to tell him I didn't believe in steps anymore. Instead, I just nodded. He smiled faintly. That's good enough for today. That night, as the hospital lights dimmed and the hallway monitors beeped in rhythm with my heartbeat, I realized something. I couldn't undo what happened. I couldn't make my mother protect me or my brother apologize. But maybe, just maybe, I could learn to stand again one way or another. Not for them. For me. And if they thought silence would keep me broken, they were about to learn what a woman rebuilding herself could become. The first time Evan helped me sit upright, I thought my spine would snap in half. Every nerve screamed. Every breath was a battle. But his voice, steady, calm, patient, cut through the panic. Breathe with me, he said softly. In through your nose, out through your mouth. You're not broken, Alyssa. You're healing. The words were gentle, but I didn't believe them. Not yet. Pain had a way of convincing you that you'd never be whole again. For weeks, The hospital became my world, a sterile, humming machine that measured my progress in inches and seconds. Each morning, nurses adjusted my brace, therapists shifted my legs, and I stared at the ceiling tiles, counting breaths instead of dreams. Mom came every afternoon, her perfume filling the room before she even spoke. "How are you feeling today?" she'd ask, voice too bright. "Like my back's on fire," I'd answer. She'd frown, smoothing the blanket as if straightening the sheets could fix me. "You're strong. You'll get through this." But she never said I'm sorry. Never said what happened to you was wrong. Her eyes would dart toward the door before lowering her voice. "And remember, no one needs to know about Mark. You fell. That's all." I stopped answering after the first week. Silence was safer. Sometimes she'd fill it herself, talking about Mark's new job or how stressed he'd been lately, as though my injury had been a minor family inconvenience instead of a life-altering event. One day, she said, "He feels terrible, you know." I stared at her. "He should." Her jaw tightened. "He's your brother, Alyssa. Don't let one mistake define him." I almost laughed, but the movement hurt too much. "One mistake defined me, Mom. It's called a spinal injury." She didn't come for 3 days after that. Evan was the opposite of her, unhurried, unpretentious, unafraid of silence. He never asked about my family. Maybe he saw enough in the way I flinched when people raised their voices. He'd come in each morning, roll up the sleeves of his uniform, and begin with the same calm tone. "Ready?" The answer was always no. But he waited until I nodded. He never pushed too hard, but he also never let me quit. If I cried, he handed me a tissue, without judgment. If I cursed, he smiled faintly and said, "That's good. Anger moves muscles." By the third week, I could sit unassisted for 5 minutes. It felt like climbing Everest. "You did that," he said after I managed to hold myself upright. "Not me."
You.
I wanted to believe him. But belief takes time to grow back, like trust after betrayal. Sometimes, at night, I replayed the fall in my head, the sharp sound, the flash of pain, the moment my mother's voice shifted from concern to calculation. I couldn't hate Mark as cleanly as I wanted to. The memory of his face after it happened, shocked, pale, terrified, still haunted me. But I could hate her silence. That cold, deliberate denial. When you're lying in a hospital bed, you start measuring love differently. Not in words, but in what people refuse to see. One morning, Evan brought in a small music speaker. "We're trying something different today," he said. He played an old instrumental track, soft piano, a slow rhythm, and began guiding my legs through small movements. The music helped. It made the pain less clinical, more human. At one point, he said quietly, "You used to paint, didn't you?" I frowned. "How do you know?" He smiled. "You talk like someone who notices details. Artists see the world in pieces." I hesitated, then said, "I used to illustrate children's books. I haven't picked up a brush in months." He nodded. "Then that's your first goal. When you can sit without help for 30 minutes, you paint again." I laughed weakly. "You really think I'll want to?" He met my eyes. "I think you'll need to." It took 6 weeks. 6 weeks of trembling arms, sleepless nights, and muscles that screamed in protest. But one quiet afternoon, I sat up alone for half an hour. When Evan returned to check on me, I told him the time. He grinned. "Then you know what that means." He set a small table across my lap with a sketch pad and a box of colored pencils he must have borrowed from the pediatric ward. "Start with something simple," he said. The paper blurred for a moment. My hands shook as I lifted the pencil. I didn't draw a landscape or a person. I drew a line. Just one steady, imperfect line. Then another. And somewhere between the second and third, I started crying. Evan didn't say anything. He just sat in the chair beside me, silent, letting me remember how to breathe again. That night, I texted my mother for the first time in days. I started drawing again. She replied almost immediately. "That's wonderful, honey. Maybe now things can go back to normal." Normal. The word made me nauseous. Because in her world, normal meant pretending. Pretending my brother hadn't broken something in me that doctors couldn't fix. Pretending my silence was love. I stared at the screen, then typed back. Nothing will ever be normal again, Mom. I didn't send it, but I didn't delete it either. Evan noticed the change in me before I did. You're angry, he said one morning, as I gripped the parallel bars tighter than usual. Is that bad? I asked through clenched teeth. It's real, he said simply. Let it stay long enough to turn into fuel. That became our rhythm, movement and honesty. I didn't tell him details, but he never asked for them. It was like he understood that healing wasn't just physical. It was about reclaiming ownership of my own story. Sometimes, after therapy, we'd sit in the hospital courtyard. He'd bring 2 coffees and talk about normal things, music, movies, his niece who wanted to be a dancer. I didn't realize how much I'd missed ordinary conversation until then. The kind where no one tiptoed around you like you were fragile glass. One afternoon, he said, You don't have to stay here forever. There's a rehab center downtown, better equipment, fewer rules. I hesitated. That sounds expensive. He smiled. I can help you apply for the patient assistance program. You qualify. He said it like it was the most natural thing in the world, like helping someone mattered more than keeping professional distance. And maybe that was the first time I let myself trust him. A few days later, Mom showed up unannounced again. She had flowers this time, roses, her favorite, not mine. I talked to the doctor, she said cheerfully. They said you're improving fast. Isn't that great? I nodded slowly. It is. She sat down, smoothing her skirt. So, Mark wants to visit. My stomach turned.
No.
Her smile faltered. Alyssa, he feels terrible. He's been going to anger management classes. He's changed. I stared at her. He changed because he almost paralyzed me? Her expression hardened. Don't be cruel. Cruel? My voice shook. You're asking me to forgive someone who did this to me, and you're calling me cruel? Her jaw tightened. Family is all we have, Alyssa. You can't stay angry forever. I can stay honest, I said quietly. She stood up, clutching her purse. You've always been dramatic. Maybe that's why this happened. You provoke people. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The words hit harder than the fall ever had. Evan walked in just as she was leaving. He must have seen my face because he didn't ask what happened. He just knelt beside me and said softly, You're not what she says you are. Something in me cracked then, not from pain, but from relief. Because finally, someone said what I'd been dying to hear. That night, I dreamed I was standing again. No brace, no crutches, just me, steady and unafraid. When I woke, I couldn't tell if the tears on my face were from grief or hope. A week later, I moved to the downtown rehab center. Evan helped arrange the transfer, insisting it was time for progress. The new facility was brighter, livelier, less like a hospital and more like a place where life restarted. As we wheeled through the hallway, Evan said, You ready for a fresh chapter? I smiled weakly. You make it sound easy. He shrugged. I didn't say easy. I said worth it. When he left that day, I realized something. I wasn't afraid anymore. Of pain. Of standing. Of telling the truth. Because if my mother's silence had been a cage, then every step I took now, no matter how small, was the sound of the lock breaking. That night, before turning off the lights, I texted Mom again. I'm transferring tomorrow. Don't come. A minute later, she replied. You're making a mistake. I stared at the screen until the message blurred. Then I wrote back.
No.
I'm finally fixing one. And this time I hit send. The first morning at the rehabilitation center smelled different, less like disinfectant, more like coffee and new beginnings. The building itself felt alive. Windows stretched from floor to ceiling, sunlight spilling onto polished wood floors. There were indoor plants everywhere, ferns, succulents, even a lemon tree by the reception desk. After months of hospital walls that hummed with fluorescent indifference, this place almost felt like a home. The nurses greeted me by name. No hushed tones, no pitying stares. Just warmth. Evan had transferred my records himself. When I saw him waiting near the therapy hall, a clipboard tucked under his arm, He gave a small smile. "Welcome to the next chapter," he said. I smiled back, weak but real. "Do all chapters start at 7 a.m.? Only the good ones." The sessions were harder here, longer stretches, smaller excuses. The room was full of people at different stages of recovery. A teenager learning to walk after a car accident, a retired teacher relearning hand control, a young man with a prosthetic leg practicing balance. No one looked at me as broken. We were all rebuilding something invisible. Evan taught me how to listen to my body again. "Pain isn't always danger," he reminded me. "Sometimes it's communication." At first, every muscle trembled with rebellion. But over time, the tremors changed. They became a rhythm, a heartbeat of effort. When I managed to lift myself from the chair without help for the first time, the whole room erupted in small applause. I laughed, breathless. Evan just nodded, that quiet pride in his eyes.
"See? Still standing," he said.
Evenings were the hardest. After therapy ended and the hallways grew quiet, the ghosts of old conversations came back, the echo of my mother's voice, the memory of Mark's apology that never arrived. But something in me had started shifting. The silence didn't swallow me anymore. I filled it with sketches. I began drawing again properly, not just lines but faces. Faces of people in the therapy room, hands in motion, the tilt of Evan's posture as he adjusted someone's stance. I sketched from the wheelchair's tray table, sometimes until midnight. The staff started calling me the artist in residence. I liked that. One afternoon, Evan caught me drawing him. I froze, embarrassed. He tilted his head. "That's actually really good." "Is that me or Tom Holland?" "Depends on how much coffee you've had today," I said. He laughed, and for the first time since the fall, I realized my laughter didn't sound like someone else's. Week by week, my independence returned in pieces, small, stubborn victories. I learned to transfer from chair to bed without help, to brace my legs during stretches, to stand with parallel bars for almost a full minute. But the biggest change wasn't physical, it was internal. Evan noticed before I did. "You're looking people in the eye again," he said one morning. I shrugged. "That's a good thing, right?" "It's a brave thing." I didn't tell him that for years I'd learned to keep my eyes down at home, to make myself smaller, so my brother's temper wouldn't find me, so my mother's disappointment wouldn't sting as much. The habit had sunk deep into my muscles, as real as any injury. Now, every time I met my own reflection upright in the mirror, I whispered quietly, "You deserve to take up space." One rainy Thursday, I found a letter in my mailbox at the rehab center. No return address, but I recognized the handwriting instantly, my mother's. "Alyssa, we miss you. Mark is doing better. He wants to see you. Let's put this behind us. You need your family." I read it 3 times, hands trembling. There was no mention of my pain, no apology, no ownership, just the same quiet demand for silence dressed in concern. Evan found me sitting in the lounge later, the unopened envelope beside my coffee cup. "You look like you're somewhere else," he said. I hesitated, then handed it to him. "For my mom. She still thinks I should forget." He didn't read it, just placed it back on the table. "You get to decide what forgetting means. It doesn't have to mean pretending." His words landed heavier than he realized. That night, I wrote in my sketchbook, "Pretending is just another kind of paralysis." A week later, the center held a small open house event. Patients could showcase their progress, art, or crafts. Evan encouraged me to participate. "I'm not ready for that," I said. He grinned. "You already are. You just need to see it." I almost didn't sign up. But on the day of the event, as people set up tables and posters, something inside me shifted. I rolled into the hall with my sketchbook and a handful of finished drawings, portraits of fellow patients, of movement, of strength disguised as fragility. By noon, my table had gathered a small crowd. Visitors stopped to look, some asked to buy prints. A woman in her 60s, holding a cane, touched one drawing gently and whispered, "That looks like hope." I smiled. That's exactly what it is. Evan watched from across the room, arms folded, proud. When he walked over later, he said, "Told you." I shook my head. "No, you showed me." As my therapy advanced, I was able to walk short distances with a walker. The first time I crossed the gym floor, the entire staff paused to cheer. My knees shook, my breath hitched, but I kept going. Each step felt like reclaiming a word my mother had stolen from me. Afterward, Evan sat beside me as I cooled down. "You've been waiting for permission your whole life," he said quietly. "You don't need it anymore." I swallowed hard. What if I still want it? "Then give it to yourself," he said simply. That sentence stayed with me. One evening near the end of the month, I found myself alone in the art room long after everyone had left. The rain tapped gently on the windows. My legs still ached, but I felt restless, alive. I opened a fresh canvas and began to paint, not from memory, but from emotion. I painted light breaking through shadows, fractured shapes that looked like bones and roots intertwining, and in the center, a figure standing, not straight, but steady. When Evan walked in to check on the studio lights, he froze. "That's beautiful," he said. "It's unfinished." He stepped closer. "So are you. That's what makes it beautiful." For a long moment, neither of us said anything. The air felt quiet but full. It wasn't romance, it was recognition. Two people who had learned that strength isn't loud. Before leaving, he said softly, "You should exhibit this someday." "Maybe I will." And I meant it. By the end of my third month, I could walk from the therapy room to the garden without assistance. The first time I made it outside alone, the sunlight felt different, warmer, thicker, more real. I stood beneath the lemon tree that had greeted me that first day and breathed in deeply. Freedom had a scent, citrus, rain, and quiet victory. That night, I called my mother for the first time since the letter. She answered on the second ring. "Alyssa?" Her voice was cautious. "I'm getting stronger," I said. "That's wonderful, sweetheart. I wanted you to know because I'm not coming home." Silence. Then, softly, "You don't mean that." "I do. I can't heal in a place that asks me to lie." Her sigh crackled through the line. "You're being dramatic again." "No," I said quietly. "I'm being honest." I ended the call before she could answer. For the first time, I didn't feel guilty. I felt free. The next morning, Evan noticed the difference in my posture. "You look taller," he said. I laughed. "Maybe I finally believe I can stand." He smiled. "That's the hardest part." As I stepped onto the treadmill for the first time, my reflection caught in the mirror. I barely recognized the woman looking back, hair tied loosely, eyes steady, a faint scar visible at her temple, but no longer defining her. I whispered to her, "You made it." Evan pretended not to hear, but I saw the small smile tug at the corner of his mouth. That evening, the sky outside the center flared orange and gold. I sat by the window, sketchbook open, drawing the horizon. In the distance, two birds lifted from the same branch, flying in different directions. For the first time in a long time, that image didn't feel sad. It felt like truth. Every sunrise felt like a checkpoint now. I'd wake to the sound of birds nesting outside the rehab center windows, stretch until my back ached, and then reach for my sketchbook. The pages had become my therapy long before I could walk. What began as scribbles of motion, hands, bars, the tilt of a wheelchair, had grown into full scenes, people standing again, people healing, people refusing to stay invisible. Dr. Singh, the center's counselor, noticed the change before I did. "You draw freedom," she said one morning as we reviewed my progress notes. "But I think you're really sketching your voice." I smiled faintly. Maybe both. Evan's sessions grew more challenging. He'd replace the walker with light support straps and insisted I take steps unaided, even if it meant stumbling. "Falling forward is still progress," he reminded me. One afternoon, I managed 10 steps before collapsing onto the padded mat, breathless and laughing. He handed me a towel, grinning. "Record-breaking distance." I teased back, "What's the prize?" "More steps tomorrow." I groaned, but inside, the laughter stayed. It was proof I was no longer afraid of the ground. Outside therapy, I began volunteering in the art room for other patients, sketching cards, teaching simple shading techniques. Watching others express what words couldn't say reminded me why I'd chosen art in the first place. It was there that I met Rosa, a quiet woman recovering from a stroke. She could barely speak, but her eyes lit up whenever she saw color. I showed her how to blend pastels with tissue paper, and the first time she managed a sunset, she squeezed my hand in gratitude. Later, when Evan passed by, he whispered, "That's the most you've smiled all week." I shrugged. Maybe healing multiplies when you share it. He nodded. Exactly. A few weeks later, the rehab center held a small exhibition for patient artwork. I nearly backed out, but Rosa begged me to display something, so I submitted one piece, a watercolor I'd painted after my first solo walk. It showed a cracked vase filled with wildflowers. One petal was falling, midair, but the vase still stood tall. During the exhibition, visitors moved slowly along the walls, admiring, whispering. When they stopped at my piece, a woman turned to me and said softly, "That one feels like forgiveness." I froze. She couldn't have known how close that word sat to my chest, heavy and unspoken. Later, Evan found me sitting outside under the lemon tree. "You didn't tell me you submitted that painting," he said. "I didn't want to make it about me." "It already is about you," he replied. "It's survival disguised as art." The wind stirred the leaves, carrying the citrus scent between us. For the first time in months, I realized I didn't just want to survive anymore, I wanted to live. That night, I got an email from a children's publishing company I'd once freelanced for. They'd seen some of my old work on social media and wanted to commission illustrations for a new book, stories about resilience for young readers. When I told Evan the next day, his grin nearly split his face. "That's incredible." I laughed nervously. "I haven't worked since, you know." "Then it's time," he said. "Tell your story through them." His words stayed in my mind. That evening, as I reread the email, I realized what scared me most wasn't returning to work. It was returning to being seen. I'd spent months hiding behind recovery, letting therapy define me. But maybe it was time to let creation define me again. By spring, my sessions had shifted outdoors. The staff wanted us to reconnect with movement beyond the gym. The center's garden was alive with lavender and mint, bees buzzing lazily between blooms. Evan walked beside me as I practiced balance along a gravel path. "How's the book project going?" "Slow," I admitted. "Every sketch turns into something personal. The editor wanted cheerful animals, but I keep drawing people climbing out of holes." He chuckled. "Maybe the world needs both." We stopped by a bench near the pond. I sat, stretching my back carefully. "Do you ever think about going back home?" he asked. I hesitated. Home stopped feeling like home the day they asked me to lie. He nodded, expression serious. "Then build a new one." Something about that sentence felt like permission. A week later, a thick envelope arrived at the front desk. It was from my mother again, this time with a neat return address and heavy stationery. I almost didn't open it. Inside were 2 letters. The first was short, polite. "Your brother's getting married in June. We'd like you to attend. It would mean a lot to him, and to me." The second was from Mark. The handwriting shook. "I'm sorry. I don't expect forgiveness. I just hope you can walk again, and live free from this. You didn't deserve it." My throat closed. The old Alyssa would have torn the letters apart. But now I placed them on my lap and simply breathed. They didn't absolve anything, but they acknowledged it. And sometimes, acknowledgement was the beginning of change. That evening, I showed the letters to Dr. Singh. She read quietly, then asked, "What do you want to do with them?" "I don't know," I whispered. "Part of me wants to burn them. Another part wants to frame them." She smiled gently. "Maybe keep them until you decide. You're allowed to wait." For once, waiting didn't feel like weakness. Days grew longer, therapy hours shorter. My body moved with a rhythm that used to belong only to others. Every step still carried memory, but it no longer hurt the same way. Sometimes I'd catch Evan watching me during sessions, not as a patient, but as a person learning how to live again. We didn't talk about what had happened at home anymore. Our conversations had shifted to what came next. He helped me draft an application for an artist grant, encouraged me to pitch a small exhibit about art and recovery. "You've got a voice people need to hear," he said. I shook my head. "I'm not a speaker." Then paint it, he replied. So I did. My new series was called Gravity Lessons. Each canvas depicted fragments of weight and release, hands gripping bars, shadows stretching into light, a spine made of flowers instead of bone. When I showed them to Dr. Singh, she whispered, "These aren't paintings, Alyssa. They're testimony." That word lingered in me. Testimony. Not accusation. Not revenge. Just truth in color. In early summer, the publishing house invited me to present at a local school. The theme was resilience through art. I almost refused, but Evan talked me into it. Kids don't need perfection, he said. They need proof. So, 2 months later, I stood in a classroom surrounded by bright paper murals and curious faces. My cane leaned beside me, visible and unapologetic. I showed the children my drawings of animals with mended wings and told them how sometimes broken things still fly. Afterward, a little girl with freckles raised her hand. "Did you ever stop being scared?" she asked. I paused. "No," I said honestly. But I learned that bravery isn't the absence of fear. It's standing up even when your knees still shake. The teachers clapped. The kids beamed. And for the first time since that night months ago, I felt proud of the woman standing in front of them. When I returned to the rehab center that evening, Evan was waiting near the entrance. "How'd it go?" I smiled. "I think I gave my first real speech." He grinned.
See?
"Told you the world needed your voice." I laughed. "You were right. Don't let it go to your head." "Too late," he said, pretending to bow. Later that night, alone in my room, I reread Mark's letter again. I still couldn't forgive him. Not yet. But the words didn't sting the way they once had. I took out a blank page and began sketching, a man handing over a heavy stone, and a woman walking away lighter. When the drawing was finished, I wrote beneath it, "Forgiveness doesn't mean return. It means release." Summer heat rolled through the city, filling the evenings with the smell of jasmine and asphalt. My discharge date approached. Dr. Singh congratulated me, the staff threw a small party, and Evan gave me a lemon sapling in a ceramic pot. "So you never forget where you found sunlight," he said. I traced the leaves with my fingers, smiling. "You're not rid of me that easily." "I'd never want to be," he said softly. It wasn't romance. It was gratitude wrapped in friendship, 2 lives that had collided at the exact right moment. That night, I placed the sapling by my window. Moonlight touched its smallest leaf, and for the first time since my fall, I whispered a thank you to the pain that had forced me to rebuild, to the silence that had taught me the value of truth, and to the people who had stayed. Tomorrow, I would walk out of this place on my own 2 feet. Not perfectly, not pain-free, but free. The morning I left the rehabilitation center, the sky looked impossibly wide. I stood by the doors with the lemon sapling Evan had given me, sunlight touching the leaves like a blessing. The driver waited quietly by the curb, but I didn't move right away. I wanted to memorize the sound of the building, the echo of rolling wheels, the soft clink of walkers, the laughter from the therapy hall. It was the soundtrack of my rebirth. Evan walked out beside me, carrying one last folder of paperwork. "You're officially discharged, Miss Carter," he said with a grin. "Discharged sounds so medical," I said. "Can't we call it graduation?" He laughed.
Fine.
"Congratulations, graduate." He hugged me quickly, the kind of steady embrace that says go live your life. When I pulled back, he said, "Remember, progress isn't a straight line." "I know." I lifted the sapling slightly. "That's why I'm taking my own roots with me." My new apartment was on the 2nd floor of a building painted the color of faded sea glass. It smelled like dust and possibility. The landlord hesitated when he saw my cane, asking if I'd manage the stairs. I smiled and said, "That's why I chose the 2nd floor, so I keep practicing." Unpacking took days. Every movement was slow but deliberate. I placed the lemon sapling on the balcony and pinned my sketches along the living room wall like windows into the past, each one proof that I had survived myself. For the first time in almost a year, I slept without the sound of machines. The city hummed below my window, alive, indifferent, and utterly freeing. My first freelance job after recovery arrived 2 weeks later, the same children's publisher that had contacted me during therapy. They wanted 10 illustrations for a book called The Sky Between Branches. The story was about a bird who forgets how to fly after storm. When I read the manuscript, I had to set it down halfway through. It felt like someone had written my own story in feathers and clouds. I drew slowly, lovingly. Each wing beat, each gust of wind became an act of defiance. When I sent the final files, the editor replied, "These aren't just drawings, Alyssa. They're healing on paper." I cried quietly at my desk. Healing had finally paid the bills. Summer bled into early autumn, and with it came a letter from the local art collective. They were hosting an exhibit titled Silent Voices, a showcase for artists who'd used creativity to process trauma. They invited me to contribute. The old me would have declined, terrified of attention. But the woman standing in my small sunlit kitchen that day wasn't afraid of being seen anymore. I emailed back a single line. I'd be honored. Preparing for the exhibit became its own kind of therapy. I worked for weeks, often late into the night, surrounded by music, the smell of paint, and the gentle buzz of city life outside. The centerpiece painting was the hardest. I called it Echoes Don't Break Bones. It showed a woman made of fractured glass, her back illuminated from within, bending but never collapsing. The light spilled from her spine like sunrise through shattered windows. When I finished, I sat back and whispered, "You're allowed to shine, even where you cracked." A month before the exhibit, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. "Hi, Alyssa?" It was Mark. His voice sounded smaller than I remembered. I froze. "How did you get my number?" "Mom gave it to me. I just wanted to say thank you for not ruining my life." There it was, the same old language, wrapped in guilt instead of apology. "I didn't protect you, Mark," I said evenly. "I protected myself from you."
He was silent for a long time.
Finally, he said, "I'm sober now. Getting married helped. I'm trying." "I hope that's true," I said. "But trying doesn't erase what happened." "I know," he whispered. "I just needed you to hear it. And for once, that was enough." I hung up not angry, not relieved, just lighter, as if an invisible rope had finally been cut. 2 weeks later, my mother called. "I heard you're part of some art show," she said cautiously. "The papers mention local artists sharing personal experiences." "It's true." "Alyssa, are you sure that's wise? People might ask questions." "They already do, Mom. They just whisper instead of listen." "I'm tired of whispers." She sighed, long and weary. "You always had to turn everything into a statement." I smiled sadly. Maybe because silence almost killed me.
She didn't respond.
Before hanging up, I said gently, "You can come if you want, but don't expect me to protect your version of the story anymore." The line went dead. That was the last conversation we'd have before the opening night. The exhibit opened on a crisp October evening. The gallery smelled of varnish and coffee. Strings of light ran along the ceiling like constellations. My paintings hung near the center, colors and shadows stitched together in quiet defiance. People drifted from piece to piece, murmuring softly. A journalist asked if my work was autobiographical. I smiled and said, "It's about standing up after you're told to stay down." Evan showed up just before closing. He wore the same calm expression he'd had on my first day of therapy, but his eyes held pride this time. "You did it," he said, glancing around at the crowd. "We did it," I corrected.
He laughed.
"All I did was hand you a few resistance bands." "You handed me courage," I said. He looked like he wanted to argue, then stopped. "Fair enough." After everyone left, I stayed behind in the gallery's quiet hum. The last painting still glowed faintly under the lights. Echoes Don't Break Bones. I realized I wasn't scared of that title anymore. A voice came from the doorway. "Beautiful work." It was my mother. She looked smaller, older, her hair silver at the roots. I hadn't expected her to come. She walked slowly toward the painting, eyes glistening. "That's you," she said softly. "Yes," I replied. "It's me now." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she said, "I should have protected you, The words were almost a whisper, but they landed like thunder. "I know," I said quietly, "and I should have protected myself sooner." She nodded, tears streaking her makeup. "I don't deserve forgiveness." "Maybe not," I said gently, "but I deserve peace. That's why I'm here." She reached out, but I didn't step closer or back. I just let the distance exist, measured, honest, real. Then she turned and walked away, leaving the faint scent of roses behind. I stood in the silence for a long time, and for the first time, it didn't feel empty. It felt earned. When I returned home that night, I placed the exhibit's program beside the lemon sapling. It had grown taller, small buds forming at the tips. I traced one with my finger, thinking about roots and regrowth, how some things survive storms simply by choosing to bend. I opened my journal and wrote. I thought silence was loyalty. It was survival. But truth is the only thing that ever healed me. Then I signed my name beneath it. No pseudonym, no initials. Just Alyssa Carter. In the following weeks, articles about the exhibit circulated online. People sent messages, some strangers, some old friends, sharing their own stories of silence and courage. One woman wrote, "Your painting gave me words I didn't have." I read every message, heart heavy and full. For years, I'd been told that my pain should stay private, that it would shame the family. But now it was helping others find their voice. That was the opposite of shame. It was grace. Evan emailed a few days later. "Proud doesn't begin to cover it." I replied, "Neither does thank you." Winter came early that year. I spent it painting near the window, watching frost trace patterns on the glass. My spine still ached some mornings, but the ache no longer defined me. It simply reminded me of how far I'd come. The lemon tree bloomed for the first time in December. Tiny white blossoms opened, filling the room with citrus and sunlight. I laughed out loud, half in disbelief. When I texted a photo to Evan, he replied instantly, "Told you it would find its light." And for once, I didn't argue. I still carry the cane. Some days my steps are strong, others hesitant. But each one is mine. I don't know if my family will ever fully understand what they did, or what they lost. But I finally understand what I gained, the power to tell my story without permission. Maybe that's all healing really is, learning that your truth doesn't need anyone's approval to exist. The night before New Year's, I stood on my balcony, city lights shimmering like tiny promises below. I held the lemon tree close and whispered, "We made it." And the wind, soft and forgiving, seemed to answer back, "Yes, you did." The weeks after the exhibit felt like walking into a different kind of light. People I'd never met began reaching out, students, artists, survivors, some with shaky handwriting, others with long emails that began the same way. "I saw your painting." Each message carried a piece of my own story inside it. Brokenness, rebuilding, fear, and hope stitched together like the seams of a scar. At first, I tried to answer everyone. Then I realized I didn't have to fix their pain. Sometimes, listening was enough. My silence used to be surrender. Now, it was empathy. In February, the publishing company released The Sky Between Branches with my illustrations. On the back cover, in small letters, it read, "Art by Alyssa Carter." Seeing my name in print didn't feel like pride, it felt like coming home. At the book launch, a journalist asked if I'd always wanted to work with stories about healing. I hesitated, then said, "I think stories about healing find you when you're finally ready to tell them." Evan was there too. He stood at the back of the room, smiling like a proud coach at a victory lap he'd quietly trained me for. Afterward, he handed me a small gift, a paintbrush engraved with the words, "Keep rebuilding." "Realize you're part of this story, right?" He chuckled. "Only the background details. You're the main subject." For once, I didn't argue.
He was right.
Spring came early that year. The lemon tree thrived, heavy with small fruit. I started renting a corner studio in the same district where the exhibit had been held, a small space with tall windows and cracked concrete floors. I wanted to create art that was about more than pain. So I began a series called People in Motion. Every piece captured a moment of perseverance, a child learning to swim, a man carrying groceries on prosthetic legs, a woman laughing mid-cry. When a local magazine featured the collection, they called it a visual language of survival. The phrase made me smile. It sounded exactly like what I'd been trying to paint. One afternoon, I received a letter forwarded through the gallery. The handwriting was familiar, careful, almost formal. It was from my mother. "Alyssa, I saw your paintings in the paper. I didn't understand before. Maybe I still don't. But I'm proud of what you've done. Your father would have been too." It was the first kind thing she'd said in years. I read it twice before folding it neatly and placing it between the pages of my sketchbook. Evan's words echoed in my head. You get to decide what forgiveness means. Maybe this was it, not erasing the past, but letting it rest quietly where it could no longer reach me. That summer, the art collective invited me to teach a weekend workshop for trauma survivors. The idea terrified me. I wasn't a teacher, I told them. They said, "You don't need to be. You just have to be real." So, I did it. The first morning, 10 people sat in a circle, each holding a blank canvas. Some had visible scars. Others carried ones no one could see. I started by saying, "You don't have to draw beauty. Just draw truth." For hours, we painted together, colors spilling like confession. A young man drew an empty chair. A middle-aged woman painted a door half open. When one participant broke down crying, the others didn't rush to comfort her. They just stayed beside her, brushes moving in quiet solidarity. When it ended, one woman hugged me and whispered, "I didn't know art could be a voice." I smiled. It's not art that speaks. It's courage disguised as color. That night, I walked home under a sky streaked with pink and orange, and for the first time, I felt that my pain had turned into purpose. A few months later, I was invited to a national conference on mental health and creativity. They wanted me to speak about how art helped me heal. My first instinct was panic. Public speaking had never been my strength. But then I remembered that little girl from the school who asked if I ever stopped being scared. Maybe courage wasn't about not being scared, it was about walking on stage anyway. So I agreed. When the day came, I wore a simple blue dress and carried the cane that had become both companion and symbol. My hands trembled as I stepped to the microphone. The room quieted. "I used to think silence was safety," I began. "I learned it's just another kind of pain." Art became the language my fear couldn't speak. I told them about the first shaky sketches, the lemon tree, the small victories that felt bigger than mountains. I didn't mention names, or places, or family drama. I just told the truth that belonged to me. When I finished, there was a moment of stillness, then a standing ovation that felt like forgiveness in motion. Afterward, a young reporter approached me. "Do you ever regret speaking up?" she asked. I thought about my mother, about Mark, about the night that started it all. Then I said, "No. Regret lives in silence. Truth breathes." The months that followed were full of quiet success. My art began traveling to exhibitions in other cities. I collaborated with therapists to design creative workshops for hospitals. Every project felt like another doorway opening, another echo of what healing could look like when shared. Evan visited my studio one afternoon, hands in his pockets, surveying the chaos of canvases and color. "You've built an empire of resilience," he said. I laughed. "It's just paint." He shook his head. "No, it's proof." He helped me rearrange frames and joked about taking commission fees for motivational speeches. Before leaving, he said, "You know what's funny? When we first met, you couldn't look anyone in the eye. Now you stare down whole rooms." I smiled. Maybe I just stopped apologizing for existing. "Don't ever start again," he said, and left me with a faint echo of pride lingering in the doorway. As the year drew to a close, I received an invitation from my hometown museum. They wanted to feature Echoes Don't Break Bones in a permanent display on artists of resilience.
At first, I hesitated.
Returning there felt like reopening an old wound. But then I remembered the painting's light, the fractured glass that refused to dim, and I knew I had to go. When I arrived, the curator led me to the display room. The painting hung alone on a pale wall, illuminated softly from above. The plaque beneath read, "Alyssa Carter, 2024, Echoes Don't Break Bones, a study in survival. Standing there, I thought about that night long ago, the one that fractured everything. And I realized I wasn't remembering it with pain anymore. I was remembering it with distance, like an echo fading across a canyon. My mother didn't attend the unveiling, but she sent flowers. White lilies, my childhood favorite. The card read simply, "For the strength I didn't have, but you did." I placed the card behind the frame. That's where it belonged. Part of the story, but not the whole of it. Back home, I opened the windows wide and let the cool air rush in. The lemon tree had grown tall enough to reach the balcony railing, tiny yellow fruit gleaming in the dusk. I made tea from one of the lemons, smiling at the sour-sweet balance on my tongue. I sat down to sketch again, not for work, not for anyone else. Just for me. The drawing was simple, a spine made of tree roots, strong, winding upward, leaves curling toward light. Beneath it I wrote, "Not broken, replanted." For years, I'd believed my worth had to be proven to others, to my family, to the world, even to myself. But the truth was simpler. My existence, my healing, my voice were enough. That night, before turning off the lights, I opened my journal to the last page. Some people will never apologize. Some wounds will never be erased. But life goes on, not perfectly, but honestly. And that's enough. I closed the journal, exhaled slowly, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I was surviving anymore. I was simply living. It's been 5 years since I last set foot inside a hospital. I still walk with a cane on rainy days, and my back aches when I paint too long. But those are the smallest reminders of the biggest miracle. I'm still here, and I'm free. The world I built after the pain looks nothing like the one that broke me. My days start with sunlight, not shouting. My mornings smell like coffee and citrus from the lemon tree that refuses to stop growing. Sometimes I think about how much of healing is repetition. You water what once died. You speak what once went unsaid. You love the parts of yourself that used to terrify you. And somewhere between all that, you wake up one morning and realize you're happy. Not loud, cinematic happiness. Quiet, steady, earned. The studio has changed too. What was once a tiny room with cracked floors is now a vibrant space filled with students, canvases, and music. I teach 2 workshops a week and mentor young artists who use their work to process trauma. One of my students, a 19-year-old named Lily, paints oceans that look like memories. She reminds me of who I was, a little too careful, a little too afraid to call her art powerful. Last month, she brought me a small painting of hands reaching for light. "You said we should paint what freedom feels like," she told me. "This is mine." I hung it near the door so everyone who enters sees it first. Because that's what healing does, it multiplies. Evan still visits sometimes. He left the rehab center 2 years ago to open his own physical therapy practice, focused on recovery through movement and mindfulness. We keep in touch through postcards and coffee whenever our schedules align. He came by last week with his daughter, a toddler with wild curls and a smile like dawn. She wanted to see the famous lemon tree, he said. I laughed. Famous is generous. Stubborn, maybe. We sat on the balcony, the child giggling as she poked at the leaves. Evan leaned back, watching her. "Do you ever think about how far you've come?" "Every day," I said softly. "But mostly I think about how far I almost didn't." He nodded. "That's what makes the view worth it." He stayed for tea, and when they left, the apartment felt full even after the door closed. That's the thing about the people who help you heal. They never really leave. They just live quietly in the parts of you they helped repair. My family is quieter now. Mark and his wife live in another state. We speak occasionally, birthdays, holidays, polite texts. His tone is humble, and I've stopped expecting closure. The apology he gave years ago was the only one he knew how to make. I accepted it, not because it was perfect, but because I was done carrying anger. Mom and I talk every few months. Our conversations are civil, careful, like walking through old ruins without touching the walls. She asks about my work, I tell her about new projects. Sometimes, when her voice trembles, I wonder if she misses the version of me who stayed silent. But that version is gone. I buried her gently, with gratitude. 3 years ago, the museum that displayed Echoes Don't Break Bones asked me to contribute a new series. I titled it What Light Learns. Each piece showed transformation, objects once broken now reimagined as something else, a cracked cup turned into a candle holder, torn cloth becoming a kite, fractured glass refracting rainbow light. The opening night drew a crowd I never expected. I stood quietly in the corner, listening as strangers debated the meanings. One woman said, "It's not about pain, it's about what survives it." And I thought, yes, that's exactly it. After the show, a teenage girl approached me shyly. "My mom said your first painting helped her leave a bad situation," she whispered. "She wanted me to thank you." I hugged her, tears blurring the edges of the moment. Healing had gone full circle. Mine had helped someone else start theirs. Last winter, I bought a small cabin an hour outside the city. I wanted somewhere quiet to paint without deadlines or noise. The first time I stepped inside, I knew it was right. The walls were bare pine, the fireplace cracked with soot, and the air smelled like rain and wood smoke. I keep my old sketches stacked in a trunk by the window. Sometimes I pull them out and trace the faded pencil lines, remembering who I was when I drew them. Not with sadness, just awe. The cabin has become my sanctuary. I paint there without purpose now, no exhibits, no audience. Just me, the brush, and whatever truth shows up on the canvas. Every year, on the anniversary of the fall, I take a small ritual walk. Not out of grief, but gratitude. I start at dawn, cane in hand, lemon blossom tucked behind my ear. I walk until my back aches and my lungs burn just a little, then stop to watch the sunrise. This year, I reached the top of the hill near the cabin just as the first light spilled across the fields. I stood there, the wind tugging at my hair, and whispered, "Thank you for the lesson." Not to anyone, not even to life. Just to the part of me that refused to die when silence tried to bury her. That evening, I returned to the cabin, lit the fireplace, and opened my journal. It's almost full now, pages of thoughts, quotes, sketches, and memories. I flipped back to the first entry I'd written in the hospital. "I can't feel my legs." I read it without crying, because it wasn't an ending. It was the first sentence of everything that followed. I wrote beneath it, "I can feel everything now, even the ache, especially the joy." Then I closed the book, satisfied. Sometimes people ask if I ever wanted revenge. The truth?
No.
Revenge would have kept me chained to them, reliving the same pain with new costumes. Justice wasn't punishing them, it was living fully despite them. Peace isn't loud. It's waking up and realizing you didn't think about the hurt today. It's the freedom of being whole without needing permission. That's what I found. I still keep Evan's engraved paintbrush on my desk. The letters have faded slightly from use, but they still read clearly. Keep rebuilding. I use it whenever I start something new, a ritual, maybe. A reminder that everything, even beauty, is built one stroke at a time. Next month, my art school will host an exhibition of my students' work. Lily, the girl who painted the hands reaching for light, has become the curator. She's nervous, but I told her what Evan once told me. "You're already ready. You just have to see it." Maybe that's the greatest legacy I can leave behind, teaching others that broken beginnings can still bloom into beautiful middles. On the 5th anniversary of my recovery, the local newspaper ran a feature titled, "Alyssa Carter, Painting the Language of Resilience." They asked what I'd tell my younger self if I could. I said, I'd tell her that the fall wasn't the end. It was the beginning of her standing taller than she ever imagined. When I saw the article, I clipped it out and taped it to the inside of my studio cabinet. Not for pride, but for perspective. Because every time I doubt myself, I want to remember, I became my own proof. Tonight, the city hums outside my window, the lemon tree swaying in the warm air. I can hear laughter from the street below, strangers living lives I'll never know. It comforts me somehow, this ordinary noise. I pour myself a cup of tea and step onto the balcony. The moon is bright, the sky wide. I hold my cane loosely, but I don't lean on it. I stand for a long time, feeling the cool air on my face, my heartbeat steady and sure. Then, softly, I whisper to the night, "You kept quiet once. Look at you now." And the world answers, not with applause or thunder, but with the simple, sacred stillness of peace.